reading is from Ephesians chapter 3, and it says, "And I ask him to strengthen you by his Spirit, not a brute strength, but a glorious inner strength, that Christ will live in you as you open the door and invite him in. And I ask him that with both feet planted firmly on love, you'll be able to take in, with all followers of Jesus, the extravagant dimensions of Christ's love. Reach out and experience the breadth. Test its length, plumb the depths, rise to the heights. Live full lives, full in the fullness of God. God can do anything, you know, far more than you could ever imagine or guess or request in your wildest dreams. He does it not by pushing us around, but by working within us, his Spirit deeply and gently within us."
Cheers, mate. Is it working? It is. Great. We're going to circle back to that reading a little bit later. But as Kerr said, my name's Lisa. If we haven't met yet, I'm sorry. It's because I usually hang out with our wonderful youth because they're my favourites. But you guys are nice too. Can I add my welcome? Can I start add my welcome to all you guys who've been on the Life Weekend away? Well done for making it this far. I have been there, and I know just how tired you are right now. If you haven't got the day off tomorrow, that was a mistake. And also I want to say thank you to all of you that shared your stories. I always find them really, really moving. I do think there is something, as Kirsteen said, there's something powerful about sharing your stories, articulating and processing what has happened to help you understand your experience. So whether it is on Wednesday at the Life Weekend, on a Sunday another time, or just talking to someone in the pub or whatever, I encourage you to do that. I just love hearing the stories, don't you? Because I think they encourage us as members of the church, but they also remind us, who have been doing this for a while, of our own experience of God and our own experiences of, having faith in Jesus. And I'm always reminded of my first Life Weekend away, which was 16 years ago now, over 16 years ago, and my first experience of the Holy Spirit. So if it's all right, tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But as I said, I experienced the Spirit for the first time about 16 years ago, which was actually a really late start for me because I grew up going to church. My parents became Christians when I was a child, and once we moved from Northern Ireland, which was quite religiously fraught, to England, we started going to church as a weekly routine, and for the most part, as a child, I liked going to church. I had friends. It was quite fun. But Christianity, really, for me, the message that I got was it revolved around being good, behaving a certain way, which was good and all, but I was a very hyperactive child. And so being good, defined by generally being quite still and quiet and being quite sensible, was not really my forte. And also, my lovely dad was a total workaholic, and I interpreted his lack of time for me and lack of attention as him finding me quite irritating. And so at home and at church, as a young child, just got the message that, you know what, you just don't quite make the grade, Lisa, or you can do it for a bit, but you can't quite maintain it long enough. And this was made a little bit worse by the fact when I was about 11 or 12, my dad became the leader of the church we went to. And so the pressure to behave, increased dramatically. And it became really clear to me and my older sister and younger brother that the way we behaved directly reflected on my dad. So if I was to step out of line, even in quite what I think were quite little ways, my dad would come down on me quite hard, often in front of other people, and I'd be left to feel really quite ashamed. And so as a teenager, particularly, I think I grew quite angry and resentful towards both my dad and the church, who I felt were suffocating me and pressuring me to be something I couldn't be. I would say behind this very sulky, angry, argumentative adolescent, I was actually just really hurt, really hurting. I was carrying a lot of shame from feeling rejected, from failing to meet expectations. My parents also were really, really great at offering a home to people who didn't have a home, but the result of that was other people just seemed to have their time and not me. And of course, we interpret those things, don't we, in our own way. And so as soon as I possibly could, I left church. But while I left church behind, the hurt that I felt from being rejected and the shame that I carried came with me. And I outwardly would project a ton of confidence, I like to think, and lots of upbeat, hyperactive energy. But on the inside, I had a serious dislike for myself. And that sent me careening from one romantic relationship to the next, I was excellent at getting into them. At best, they'd last 10 to 12 months. That was pretty good going for me. I basically set my sights on somebody, do my very best to make them mine, probably in quite outrageous, slightly embarrassing ways, and then be in it for a while, and then I'd get out before they could get out first. Do you know what I mean? That kind of tactic. Reject first before they can reject you. And then I would jump into another one in rapid time, and I'm talking like hours or days. It was a skill, not one I recommend. And obviously I was trying to avoid being hurt, but obviously I got hurt. But even more than that, I really hurt other people. There's one particular old friend of mine who I completely messed around, and the way I treated them just compounded the shame I already felt. I knew I had done awful things, and it compounded all the shame I was feeling, and yet I couldn't get out of the cycle that I was stuck in. And I also remember feeling profoundly lonely a lot of the time, which didn't really make sense because I was rarely alone. Now, my sister, on the other hand, having grown up in the same house, had a completely different experience. So she went on a completely different route. When she left home and went to university, she found herself a bunch of Christian friends. And she had what she described as a really powerful encounter of the Holy Spirit and experienced God's love for herself. And so she embedded herself in her faith. You know, it came alive for her, as she would say. And in stark contrast to my dad, she was someone who always showed me tremendous grace. And she had a lot better idea of what I was up to. And yet she was always so kind, so loving, so accepting of me. And every now and again, I would go and visit her down on the south coast and hang out with her mates, who I was all slightly in awe of. And I remember particularly meeting her best mate, Lottie, who I think I saw something of myself in. And she was just this wild, free person who clearly loved Jesus and yet was so fun to be around. And she just seemed to be like, not perfect, but yet the kind of fullest, freest person that I'd ever really seen. A confidence that didn't just kind of go skin deep, but went all the way through. But I'd come back from these weekends and I would carry on in my own sort of patterns of behavior. I studied dance at uni, so after uni I was like, what am I going to do? I'm going to go study some more dance. So I had this plan to go off to New York. I had spent a summer there between my second and third year. I had the best time. And so I was like, let's do that again. That was great. And so I got a job. I saved up some money. And I went out to New York for a few months. And I lived off my savings. So I had no job. Dream. And I spent my days taking dance classes at some of the best modern dance studios in the world. And in the evenings, I'd hang out with friends, and I would be invited along to some really amazing parties. I went to some really cool sporting events. I found myself at film premieres that I had absolutely no right to be at. And I had a great time. But I also remember at the time coming back to my little room in Chinatown and still feeling that incredible sense of loneliness. And on those nights, I would find myself like thinking about all the fun I was having. And I was having a lot of fun. It was great. But I found myself longing for something more meaningful. I began to question if I could really be satisfied just kind of doing this for my entire life. That really, could I be satisfied by, just seeking fun and new experiences and another relationship? And I found myself one particular night, it must have been like 2 a.m., and I started thinking about my sister and how gracious she's always been to me, and of her best friend who was so wild and free, and that just so attracted me. And I just thought to myself, I want what they've got. And really annoyingly, I knew that was their faith, that the difference between me and them was their faith in Jesus. And so when I returned to London a few months later, I asked my sister to recommend me a church, because I'm not stupid and I'm not just going to walk into anyone. So I was like, which one do you recommend? Where should I go? And she recommended a couple, but the only one I remember is this one. Because she said this place had a reputation for having lots of creative people in it. And also she said they know grace there. And I thought, okay, well, that's what I'm looking for. So I rocked up one Sunday, and I sat kind of at the back over there, and John got up, and he spoke about the gospel of grace, about how Christianity isn't a religion, but a relationship with Jesus. It's not about a moral code or a conduct of how you should behave, what is acceptable, what's unacceptable, but actually it's a relationship with the living God who is love. And I remember sitting there and feeling like something inside me well up within me. And I wanted to stand up and just shout, I knew it, which I didn't do because that I would never have been able to come back again. It would have been mortifying. But from that moment, I decided I'm all in. This is what I am looking for. So I came along to the life course that Wednesday. It was week 1, good timing. I came every Sunday. I came to anything midweek that was going on. I even joined the staff team because they needed a receptionist and I was living off a credit card. And so I was like, that'll do. I'll do that for 6 to 12 months while I figure out what I'm going to do with my life. 16 years later. Anyway, God's got a sense of humour. And as I got plugged in here, I found John to be a particularly strange and unusual man. Now... I love you, John, but you are a strange and unusual man. What I found particularly fascinating and compelling about John was how upfront he was about his imperfections. How he just he would just come here and he would just talk about his crap. Like what was not great about him, his faults. And that was so radically different from the church leaders that I grew up with, and also, to be honest, myself, who had developed this delightful facade that hid this actual deep dislike for myself. He didn't just talk about grace. He seemed to be this walking demonstration of what it looked like, and I found it utterly compelling, if a little confronting. But while I felt that, I also couldn't bring myself to get prayer and experience it for myself. I'd spent my whole life in a church that also did ministry in the power of the Spirit, although in a lot weirder way. And so I had become an expert at avoiding prayer. It's a great time to take a break to the toilet. I remember one time when I was 14, being at a larger church gathering, and I got stuck. I don't know how I got stuck, and I suddenly found this guy praying for me, and he was pushing my head, which is rude. And I just thought, how can I make this end? And so I just thought, trustful. So I did. I remember just being like, people fall over in the Spirit. That's a thing. Someone will catch me. And I did that. And it worked. So they stopped praying. And I just had to lie there going, how long do I wait? But anyway, I had become an expert at avoiding getting prayer. But I'm here at a church. And I'm now on a staff team. And every Tuesday morning, there's an opportunity to get prayer. And every Sunday evening. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to sort of avoid the thing. But I'm still accompanied by all these fearful what-if questions. What if I open myself to God, I do this thing, and God hijacks me and takes control of my body, and I have no control over what happens? What if I start crying? I hate being sad. I don't like crying. I'd rather not. Thank you very much. Even worse, what if God gives someone a word that exposes my deepest, darkest secrets? What if, God compels me to do something I don't want to do with my life? And probably the biggest one for me, which Lincoln tapped into a little bit, was, what if I actually open myself to God and absolutely nothing happens? And that God rejects me, and it cements the belief that I have that there's something actually just wrong with me. But I found myself on a life course weekend away. Back then it was an Eastbourne. And on the Life Weekend Away, as they said, it was all about exploring, is God real? And if God's real, then can God be experienced for ourselves? So taking the theory and putting it to the test. And so I couldn't help but ask, but what if it's true? What if God is actually love? What if God does actually love me? What if I can also experience God's grace that I hear so much about and is so attractive to me? What difference would that make to me? So I found the courage in this weird little hotel basement to close my eyes and open my hands, which is just what we do here to not be distracted and to show God that we're open to kind of receiving God's presence. And I kind of just said to God, okay, God, if you are who they all say you are, then you need to show me. And to begin with, not a lot happened. I actually think the first session, I don't think anything might have happened. It's a long time ago, I can't quite remember. But what I do remember is being prayed for again. And just after a little bit of time, while there is lots of stuff going on around me that was a bit more dramatic, lots of tears and all sorts, I just began to very gently cry. And I look back on that now, and I know what was happening was just all the kind of pain, the shame, the rejection, the hurt that I had been carrying around was just making its way to the surface, that I felt safe enough somehow to kind of let that out and express some of it. And I remember a lovely lady called Wendy coming up and praying for me, and she was articulating something of what I felt, which she just said to me, something about, like, you're coming home, which is a thing that I've heard since again and again people express when they come up here, when they experience the love of God, when they experience the Holy Spirit for the first time, they just get a sense of finding their home, not in a place or in a group of people, in a relationship with someone who loved me and knew all of me and still accepted me. So that, for me, was the real beginning, I would say. And the more I opened myself to experience God, the more I found I could trust God. And so when I came back to pray again, I could open myself a little bit more. And at no point were my secrets exposed. At no point did I ever feel like I was out of control. Like, if I was crying, fine, but I could have stopped at any point and walked away. And I found that over a relatively short period of time, experienced God's love and God's acceptance and God's grace, particularly for me, displaced the shame that I felt. And I never felt that shame again, which I don't think I have the capacity to do in and of myself. And the way I saw myself shifted entirely, where I really had quite a deep self-loathing. I no longer disliked myself. I think I'm just an accurate picture that I'm great and I'm also a bit shit. And I felt like the me on the outside actually reflected who I actually was on the inside. Like, the two things came together rather than being disconnected and one, showing all great on the outside and actually feeling awful on the inside. I felt like the two things were connected. And I remember seeing my uni mates, who I hadn't seen in ages and definitely didn't know I was going to church, because that's not cool. I went and met up with them for lunch in King's Cross, and I remember at one point having lunch, and my friend Anna just stopped the whole meal to talk about how different I was. And she just said, I don't know what's going on, Lisa, but you're so different to the Lisa we knew. I mean, you're still Lisa, but there's just more. There's just some. And she just couldn't quite get a head around it, but I knew what it was. Should have told them it was Jesus, but whatever. That ship sailed. And I have grown over these last 16 or so years to absolutely believe the words of Ephesians 3, that God can do anything, far more than I can ever ask or imagine, because I have experienced it for myself, and I have had the absolute privilege of hearing story after story and seeing physical healings and extraordinary transformations in people's lives, people being one thing and suddenly being like something entirely different. That makes me believe that. I've also experienced, I hold that with the tension of prayer not always being a quick fix. And that it also, my faith hasn't prevented the difficult things happening in my life. I think we are wonderfully complex. We are all different in our makeup. We combine those things with our experiences of life, the things that have formed us, the continuous challenges and highs and lows of life. And these things make it harder or easier at different times for us to open ourselves to God. And there have been absolutely times where I don't want to open myself to God, because doing that means facing what's within, right? And I'd rather avoid that, and so I also avoid God. I, despite being 40, and haven't learned that yet, I do that for a little bit, but eventually, I will turn back to God. Because of all that I've experienced and all I've seen and all I've heard, I know that eventually I will loop back to God. I will trust God. Even in the times when I have prayed and felt absolutely nothing, come away disappointed. I might go away for a little bit, but ultimately I'll circle back, because I'm reminded again and again. Of course, the stories remind me again and again of my own experiences of God's love and grace towards me and power and compassion and all the things that I've experienced over many years. And I know that the times I have felt most alive, my most free, fullest self, when I've been most inspired, filled with hope, creative, when I have loved people well, when I've been most patient with my children, it has been at the times where I am most connected to God, when I am cooperating with the gentle work of the Spirit within me. So, whether it is your first time because you're here off the back of the Life Weekend, or you've been regularly coming for a while, but you haven't, for whatever reason, felt able to, so far, to open yourself to God. As the passage says, to open the door and invite him in. I would like to encourage you or invite you to maybe think about giving that a go tonight. I recognize that you might have your own fearful what-if questions that hold you back. But I guess my question to you is, if that is you, particularly if you've been coming for a little while, what keeps bringing you back? And I wonder if you're watching from a distance, what is it that intrigues you? What are you curious about? What are you longing actually to experience? Perhaps it's something that one of these guys said earlier. You think, I want that. I want to experience what it is that they've experienced. What if it is actually true? What difference would it make to your life? There's only one way to find out, and that is to give it a go. And I say that knowing that that is terrifying at times, and sometimes it's a process and it can take some time. I opened my phone this morning, and I opened my Bible app as one of the first things, and this Bible verse came up, which is also written by Paul the Apostle, but in Romans, and it directly connects to our passage earlier, and I just thought I'd share it as an encouragement. It encouraged me, hopefully to encourage you, and it's, again, it uses this metaphor of opening the door to God, but this one talks about God's response to us. It says, we throw open our doors to God and discover at the same moment that he has already thrown open his door to us, and we find ourselves standing where we always hoped we might stand, out in the wide open spaces of God's grace and glory.